On the morning of May 10th, 1940, the population of the Netherlands suddenly woke up to the roar of about 100 aircraft. It was the cacophony of war. The Germans had invaded the country and were now bombing airfields to destroy the Dutch air forces. As the attacks began, the Dutch military personnel witnessed something they'd never seen before. Hundreds of paratroopers were pouring from their transport aircraft and airdropping from the sky. Little did they know that the Germans were carrying out a secret operation to capture the Queen and her government, forcing the country into submission. Playing it safe. The French and British declaration of war against the German and Soviet invasion of Poland in 1939 led to the Phony War, an 8-month period in which the Allied forces limited themselves to invading Germany's Saar district. Meanwhile, Belgium and the Netherlands prepared for war, and the Dutch were in the middle of their rearmament phase when tensions began to rise in Europe. The Dutch government wished to play it safe and did not want to antagonize Germany, one of its most important trade partners, while keeping close contact with Britain and France. The country expected to remain neutral, as it had done during World War I, but the armed forces were still mobilized in case of impending combat. The Netherlands was a strategic location craved by Germany, France, and Britain. As such, on January 20th, 1940, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill diligently attempted to convince the Dutch to attack the Reich and join the Anglo-French alliance, but the Dutch government declined. Churchill also mustered all his willpower to convince the Belgians to join forces with the United Kingdom and France, but the Belgian crown refused too. The Mechelen Incident. Exactly 10 days before Churchill's radio speech directed at the neutral nations, a peculiar incident took place over the skies of Belgium, involving a lone Messerschmitt Bf-108. On January 10th, 52-year-old Commander Major Erich Henmans got lost on his way to Cologne from Luttenheide Airfield. He was flying with Major Helmut Reinberger, a member of the elite German paratrooper divisions, and carrying secret documents related to Case Yellow or Fall Gelb, the invasion of the Low Countries. Under the thick fog of the River Meuse, Major Henmans cut off the fuel supply by mistake while looking for another lever in the cockpit. They crashed at around 11 in the morning near Vught. Reinberger immediately tried to destroy the secret documents, but 2 Belgian border guards stopped him. The 2 German officers were then taken to a border house near Mechelen aan de Maas. Once again, the 2 men attempted to burn the papers, but were seized by a Belgian captain who handed them over to Belgian intelligence personnel. Upon finding out about the incident, the Oberkommando de Wehrmacht became extremely worried. Still, the Belgians tried to deceive the Germans by implying the papers had been completely destroyed, which was not the case. In fact, the intelligence personnel recovered enough information to conclude that Germany was indeed preparing to invade the Netherlands and Belgium. King Leopold III of Belgium informed the French and British military of these documents and put his army on alert. He also contacted Princess Juliana of the Netherlands and warned her of a possible German attack. Even so, Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands and her government stood firm in their neutral stance. They believed that as long as the country did not favor any Allied forces, Germany would not make any move against them. Furthermore, Dutch Supreme Commander Isaac H. Reinders did not believe the information shared by the Belgians was authentic at all. The Belgians did not share the remains of the captured documents and refused to say more, as the secret German documents specified the Wehrmacht would only partially occupy the country if the Allied forces decided to intervene. At this point in the war, the United Kingdom and its allies needed all the support they could get, and this was the perfect opportunity to lure the Dutch into war. Fallfestung. Although the January 1940 attacks were suspended, the Wehrmacht continued going over its plans for a possible invasion. Then, as the Netherlands began to turn in favor of the Allies, Hitler gave the green light to attack. Under Fallfestung, the Wehrmacht would strike hard and quickly to isolate the Dutch army, dismantle it, and force Queen Wilhelmina and Commander Henry Winkelmann to surrender. To do so, the strike force of the Blitzkrieg forces would fall under the shoulders of the Fallschirmjägers, Hermann Göring's elite paratroopers. These men would be the first to breach the Dutch skies to secure airfields at Ockenburg, Ypenburg, and Valkenburg and incapacitate the local forces. Meanwhile, another group would be airdropped over The Hague to seize control and capture Queen Wilhelmina. Germany could not afford to send all the troops at its disposal to conquer the Netherlands. It was stretched thin, and the assigned German commanders had to choose wisely where to allocate forces to confront the Dutch army. The airborne attacks would be followed by the advance of ground infantry and the 9th Panzer Division, which would help the Fallschirmjägers take control of the bridges located at Rotterdam. The new operation was set for May 10, 1940. The Green Devils. Although there were also Fallschirmjägers from the Heer or Ground Army during the early days of World War II, they were later dissolved and integrated into the Luftwaffe. These elite-trained men would become the first pioneers of large-scale airborne operations before any other army of its time. However, the Germans did not conceive the idea of inserting troops from the air into enemy territory. During the post-war, Italian, Soviet, and American officers wrote documents about the use of transport aircraft to drop small contingents of men deep into hostile territories to capture an objective as swiftly as possible without necessarily breaking through the enemy front line. The Italian development of the static line parachute in the 1920s, in which parachutes were attached to the inside of an aircraft and deployed automatically upon departure, increased the possibilities of airborne operations. In 1935, the Soviets employed paratroopers for the first time during a series of military maneuvers in which many foreign officers were present. The Soviet paratroopers had to exit their Tupolev TB-3 transports through a hatch in the roof, crawl along the wire, align themselves along the wings, and then jump. Although the method was somewhat primitive and significantly exposed the paratroopers, Hermann Göring was impressed by the idea. When the leader became the head of the Luftwaffe, he immediately created the Fallschirmschützen Battalion, made up of volunteers eager for parachute training. The first Jaegers were trained by Bruno Brauer, and to earn their Luftwaffe parachutists badge, the men were required to complete 6 jumps successfully. The first parachute division was formed in 1938. It would be followed by others, led by renowned German commanders such as Kurt Student, Hermann Bernhard Ramke, and Richard Heydrich. Desperate air resistance. While Luftwaffe aircraft carrying German Fallschirmjägers were piercing the skies of Norway during the dawn of May 10, 1940, other German paratroopers had already hit the ground on the Dutch-Belgian border near the Dutch city of Maastricht to secure the impregnable fort of Eben-Emael. During the early hours, the Dutch population awoke to the roaring and deafening sounds of Luftwaffe aircraft engines above them. Case Yellow had just begun. Although the objective was to deceive the population and the army by making them think the aircraft were bound for the British Isles, they were nonetheless put on high alert. At about 4 a.m, Luftwaffe Junkersbombers approached the New Alexander Army Barracks, located next to the Walsdorp Army Camp, and bombed it. Over 20 minutes later, another German air group that had made its way to the North Sea turned back and returned to bomb the Ypenburg airfield to prevent the Dutch from taking the fight to the skies. Colonel Martin Fiebig's aircraft then swiftly bombed the Dutch airfield at De Kuy, destroying over 40 trainer aircraft in one run. Wing Kampfgeschwader 4, or KG-4, soon targeted the Amsterdam Schiphol airfield, destroying most of the medium bombers the Dutch Air Force had at its disposal. With the assistance of additional wings, such as KG-30, KG-54, and several others, the Luftwaffe swept over many airfields, where desperate dogfights broke out. Ultimately, it crippled the Dutch air forces severely. The bomber wings lost over 60 aircraft, but managed to neutralize the Dutch air power, while the fighter wings Jagdgeschwader 26 and Zerstörer-Geschwader 26 went on to engage the surviving Dutch aircraft, a true testament to the adversary's willpower. Only 40 Dutch aircraft would be shot down by the end of the day, and only about 60 were left to fight against the Luftwaffe. Airdropped into combat. While the Luftwaffe bombed the Dutch airfields and its fighter wings destroyed any aircraft spotted in the skies, the Fallschirmjägers were airdropped on top of the established locations to begin the capture operation. Despite the preliminary German bombardments at Ypenburg, Dutch anti-aircraft fire was still a significant threat. Soon, the sky was lit by the destruction of over 50 Ju-52 transport aircraft. Many paratroopers lost their lives before even ejecting the aircraft, reducing the combat strength of the German squads on the ground. Moreover, the Germans were airdropped without their primary weapons and had to scavenge the vicinity to find their gear and prepare for combat. Entire squads were scattered around the location, but consecutive waves quickly reinforced the German numbers. They then advanced toward the enemy to neutralize the relentless anti-aircraft fire. After intense combat encounters between the attackers and the defenders, the Fallschirmjägers seized control of Ypenburg and raised a flag to mark it as a safe location. Almost simultaneously, several German paratroopers were dropped over the Ockenburg airstrip to eradicate Dutch resistance. Although successful at first, the Germans were quickly outnumbered by Dutch reinforcements, and like their comrades at Ypenburg, they could not advance into The Hague. As the paratroopers at the Ockenburg airstrip began reorganizing to push forward, the Dutch bombed it to cripple the mounting numbers of enemies. With the airstrip almost destroyed, several other Jaegers landed on the Old Rhine shores. The Dutch destroyer HNLMS Van Galen shelled the coast in an attempt to stop the Germans from occupying the zone, but it was fruitless. Valkenburg and Katwijk were taken and secured alongside the 3 airfields. Even so, the most critical task of the Fallschirmjäger was still incomplete. They needed to capture The Hague at all costs. Bombing Rotterdam. As the odds increased against them, the Fallschirmjägers pushed forward to reach The Hague. However, their superior tactics clashed with the stiff resistance of the Dutch Grenadier Guards, which began firing artillery shells at the Germans regrouping at the Ypenburg airstrip. Following the artillery barrages, the Dutch infantry regrouped and counterattacked, surrounding the Germans at the battered airstrip. Skirmishes then broke out until the paratroopers were forced out of the location to avoid being overrun. All of the Fallschirmjägers that made it out retreated and regrouped at a nearby forest. While there, the Germans regrouped and fended off wave after wave of Dutch attacks. When their enemies finally turned back and headed for Leiden and Wassenaar to secure key locations, the Germans made their way to Rotterdam. A similar situation occurred in Valkenburg, where the paratroopers were driven off by Dutch infantry after receiving reinforcements and had to withdraw to nearby villages. By the time May 10th reached its end, the elite Fallschirmjägers had been overwhelmed and forced to retreat from the 3 airfields without ever making their way to The Hague. However, the Dutch victory was short-lived. 3 days later, Rotterdam was bombed to force the Netherlands to surrender. Queen Wilhelmina and her cabinet then fled to the United Kingdom, where she constituted a government in exile. The Queen would not return to her homeland until 1945. The events at The Hague are widely considered to be the first great airborne operation in history. Thank you for watching our video. Please like and subscribe to our Dark Documentaries channels to find more exciting historical content. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to be notified of our newest videos. Stay tuned.